It's really scary. I mean, I think this is probably one of the most complex films I've made, particularly given the budget we've got and so on. It feels daunting at times. Writing the script is one thing, but then when you're starting to piece the film together, you start to realize how many actors you've got, how many locations you've got, how many scenes you've got to keep track of. And you start to ask yourself, have you bitten off too much to chew? The interesting thing about this particular project is, of course, the casting of the main character had to be quite specific, not just in terms of age, but also in terms of ethnicity. I wanted a mixed race guy, partly because visually I wanted to talk about fertility and marriage using a mixed marriage. I work very closely with my assistant director, Mark Duggan, and my co-producer, Erik Knudsen. And together we'll do the casting sessions. We'll typically invite people in and sit and chat with them for a little while. And we found our main character in Rhys Douglas. What I like to do is a very, very simple screen test where I ask the actor to look in a particular direction off camera and to hold that look for about 10 seconds, then to look down, and then usually I'll ask them to just deliver a very simple line straight to the lens.
Suddenly, I feel like there's so much more I need to find out from you. It's funny, isn't it? When you're young, you're just thinking about the future all the time. Then you realise at some point, that without knowing the past, there is no future.
I find this simple exercise is very, very effective because it does a number of things. It tells me that I can work with an actor, for example, that they can follow some simple instructions. Now, that might seem like a silly thing, but for me, the eyes are the most important and expressive part of the body. Once we had this main character, of course, we would then be able to cast an older woman, which is what we wanted. Because of the nature of the story, we had to believe the age difference, and we had to believe the nature of their relationship. It's very quick to see whether somebody's right. I mean, sometimes it just takes a single look and you realize, oh my God, that person is just perfect. That is the character.
But a clairvoyant is not the type of person to go to a clairvoyant. Can you tell me the whole story?
The cinema image for me and the performer is really about the performance of the eyes. Once we had these two main characters, our leading man, who's called Campbell in the film, and our leading lady, who's called Jazz, I was then able to expand the casting to include Jazz's brother, Max. So gradually I've built up the cast in this kind of way, moving out from the key characters and expanding out into the wider body of the characters that we're using. I mean, often you get your one character that you're looking for, and some of the other people you've looked at actually are perfectly good actors and actually would fit different characters. So, although we were looking for a group of men who were going to fill the Max role, we were able to look at some of the other people we had brought in for other parts that we had. And it's on that sort of level that I'm often casting. I'm just looking at a kind of intuitive reaction to a person in the sense that, yeah, that person is the doctor. It fits. There is a scene, or actually there are some key scenes in the film that involve a group of homeless people. Could I, if necessary, work with this group of people and improvise on set? So during the audition session for that group of people, we actually got them together as a group. And I set them a little scenario and asked them to play that out in improvisation. And actually that proved great fun because it was wonderful to see how this, first of all, how this group of people gelled with each other, but also to see how on the spur of the moment they were able to invent really good dialogue, really good interactions that were very believable.
Sorry,
He's got a problem.
A misunderstanding.
No. There is no misunderstanding here, right?
Is there not? I've just overheard.
This has got nothing to do with you.
Excuse me.
This has got
absolutely fine. It's got nothing to do with you. Now leave.
I'm trying to help.
No,
That's
don't
all.
get involved with things you don't even know about. Now please go away.
Please let me help you.
Sit down.
Fucking asshole. And cut.
We're not a huge kind of production team. We're just 5 or 6 people. Mark Duggan, who helps with assistant directing and cinematography and editing, is almost like an assistant filmmaker. It's what we call total filmmaking. And then in sound, I brought in Karen Lauke. Now, what's interesting about Karen is that she's not actually a film sound recordist. She is really an installation artist, a kind of audio artist. Mariel, for example, our production designer, she actually works in theatre and is a scenic painter and has a lot of experience of working with theatre. Stuart, like Mark, is somebody I've worked with before on The Raven on the Jetty. And Stuart is very much involved with the post-production, in particular around special effects. And the great thing is that Stuart has been involved right from the beginning as well. Like everybody in the team, he's involved in pre-production, and then of course most of his work will actually be done in post-production. We've brought in a really brilliant guy around social media and marketing called Kane Rattray. And for the first time, we're actually thinking about the social media aspect of the project. We're thinking about marketing and we're thinking about distribution as one strategy. And we think that this might give us a different way of reaching an audience. We're kind of trying to reach an audience in new ways. So my idea really is to assemble a small, like-minded group of people who believe in this kind of idea of independent filmmaking. And therefore, what we do is that as a whole team, we go through the whole script together. And we discuss it, and we discuss the relevance and impact on each of the areas of the project. So it's very important to have one big meeting like that so that everybody can feel that they're all participating in the same project. They're not just doing a little bit, but they're actually part of a bigger whole. It's almost like you're bringing together a family to create something personal, something important. And that means actually having meetings with people. And I love bringing together the cast and crew well before a production to discuss various aspects of the project. And one of the things I like to discuss is where I'm coming from as a filmmaker. So I like to show people some clips of influential films that are influencing the way that I think about film. And it was very important for the actors to see this. I wanted to show them different kinds of cinema. A cinema that's not just about recording a dramatic performance, but a cinema that is about constructing imagery in which performance is a part.
I love this railway arch and the trains coming through and the noise of it. Here's another one, and then potentially the homeless people could have sort of set up camp. Please see the train?
On a bigger budget film, if you suddenly wanted a certain type of location or whatever, you would just throw money at it and you would either hire the kind of place you had in mind or you would build a set. One of the most enjoyable parts of low-budget independent filmmaking is actually looking for locations. And often we have very, very fortuitous encounters with locations. During our production meeting, we were having a discussion about a care home that we needed for the film. And then out of the blue, it turns out that Mariel, our production designer's cousin, happens to own a care home in the Midlands. And we visited it, and it was a perfect location for us. In the scene when he arrives to visit his mum, so he arrives, we just see him walking down one of this lifeless corridor, and at the end, in a long shot, we see him stop looking in through one door, and he says, "Hi, Mum," and he goes in. The next shot, they're outside, yeah? Janet was talking to a lady she works with whose son-in-law owns a business in Halifax. In the middle of this modern office, there was a greenhouse where they often have meetings. And this turned out to be perfect because the scene that we're dealing with is about gestation, is about fertility, is about growth. Now, that's not something that we could have even imagined. That's a good example of how sometimes you need a bit of luck, or as I prefer to call it, good fortune. So when I have these encounters with locations, even with people, and somehow these things start to fall in place, I see it almost, it might seem rather bizarre, but I see it almost like the story and the film wanting to put itself in place. Mariel, our production designer, obviously is also in charge of costumes, and she has access, actually via her theatre work, to a whole bunch of costumes. But what's also been interesting is us working with the actors themselves. And this is something that's been new for Mariel, because working in theatre, she's been used to actually sourcing all of the costumes for actors from a professional service. But what we're doing is that we are asking actors whether they've got specific things, and then we're complementing what they've got and building up a personal profile in their costumes. We can't afford to spend our way to solutions, and that is one reason why we work as much as possible with what we've got. One of the ways of coping with a production of this scale and the kind of budget we've got is that we've looked at scheduling the film over a 2.5 month period, so that we are only shooting 2 to 3 days in any one block. And that gives us just that little bit of breathing space, in the sense that we don't have to get absolutely everything in place on day one. I never really think about the camera. It's whatever I've got. And at the end of the day, I suppose it's whatever you feel comfortable with. Actually, it doesn't matter. I mean, at one stage, we even thought of the idea of shooting the whole thing on a mobile phone. I mean, that's possible too. I think these days, camera technology is so good. In some cases, people say it's too good. Some of the lenses are too sharp. You know, the resolution is too high. And I think it's actually irrelevant to think about equipment as such. What you want to do is tell a great story. And I think creative people work with whatever they can get their hands on. With the Leica SL, we needed to test the different profiles that were available, the different settings in terms of contrast and saturation and so on. We're kind of going back to the old-fashioned way of thinking of getting as close to the actual image we want in camera. You know, we actually went out one evening and we did a kind of fun experiment where we tried all the different variations of the settings related to contrast and to saturation. And going through that process is quite interesting, because you get the different looks, the different feel of the lighting situation. And for us, it's quite important, particularly for the night scenes. We were always planning to start shooting in January. But then I think it was Mark Duggan who suggested that would it not be nice to set the film in those few days leading up to Christmas, partly because of the connection to the birth of Jesus and the Immaculate Conception and so on and so forth. And I just thought that was an absolutely brilliant idea. What that also allowed us to do is the fact that we could start shooting a little bit just before Christmas, and it got us going. It gave us a real focus for a start. The most nerve-wracking part of a production for me is immediately leading up to principal photography. You know, you have to get everybody in the right place at the right time. You have to get into a rhythm of working. You want your early scenes to be shooting well, so that things are going well. That sets the tone for the rest of the shoot. When the going gets tough, you just have to get your head down. You have to realize, as the Chinese say, that even a 1,000-mile journey starts with a simple step, and then another step, and another step, and eventually you'll get there. Oh, I think you need to set the input volume somewhere. So, number 9, number 9, number 9, number 9.